Today we are going to look at the management in society, social responsibility and ethics, and in the next lecture I will talk more of responsibility, and in this lecture I will talk about more of social ethics. I think when we use these terms, we are always talking about in the context of business organizations, and the management business organizations, when we put together, the people do raise concerns, people do see what is normally used, what is normally practiced at the societal level can also be the same things at the business organizational level. So the learning objectives of this session basically are the following. At the end of this session you must be able to know and understand the meaning of business and ethics and other related concepts, 3 models of management ethics, myths in business ethics, benefits of following managerial ethics, and also guidelines in managing ethics in the workplace. We will also compare ethics and law, and probably we will spend some time about how to develop an ethical code or a guideline in an organization. As we see to achieve these things, we need to start from the philosophical view. If you see that from the Gita, we know that the concept of doing one's duty without seeking the fruits. We always talk about Gandhi's belief also about the politics and business should go work in hand and for the development of the country. These kinds of statements, these kinds of sayings are available both from Indian classics. You will also see the mythology. Through many of the stories we tell our students and children at home. All this conveys what is right, what is wrong, and how to make some decisions under certain practical constraints. And similarly in the business organization as well, when we are talking about what is correct and what is good, we have to look at our own philosophical underroots and then see how it could be converted through good practices and good stories so that people can follow whenever they have some dilemma or doubts in their minds. So look at this Arthashastra. Arthashastra also mentions that manager should be subject to an audit and his account should be looked at often for their clarity and truth. So an audit, an external view of what is being done always has been considered as part of the business ethics. So the philosophically to the whatever we are talking about the managerial discipline, the birth of the social responsibility movement in 1960s talked about that every organization should have a concern for society. The concern for society means that you cannot create an elitist view or a separate an island of only the industrial organization, but also you must have a concern for society to see what is that you can do in terms of education, health, sanitary conditions, or maybe the community welfare. And an increasing number of people asserted that because the businesses were making a profit from using country's resources, they also talked about that it is obligation of the business, it owed to the country and to the community something. So they talked about a kind of an exchange view of this ethics, that they must contribute something, they must give it back something. In that period we also see the social awareness movements raised this kind of an expectations of businesses to use their massive financial and social influence to address social problems. So they have to address the poverty, crime, environmental protection, equal rights, the public health, improving education. Many organizations in India have worked towards this. Years back the Valchanagar Industries in near Pune, so they worked very extensively to improve community and bring the community welfare. Tatas are known in terms of extending the organizational arm to help the society in terms of health, education, and several of the welfare activities. So the list could go on, in terms of how companies have done, and the public sectors were really played an important role in understanding and applying some of their resources to solve the problems of the society. The view is an ethically responsible organization is one which has developed a culture of caring for people and for the environment, a culture which flows downwards from the top managers and the leaders. So the senior people work towards the concerns for the society. They believe and they initiate the actions to do something. So it is a responsible organization. When we are using this word ethically responsible organization, so they have a culture of caring. They have a culture for caring people and also the environment. So when they make the products, they talk about the green products. When they do certain things, they do bother about recycling or protection of trees, or in terms of the use of the energy, use of the water. Apart from that, they will also see whether it is are they affecting the people, are they displacing the people. So if they are affecting or displacing the people, then they try and see what is that they need to do. So a social cost benefit analysis could always bring about what that organization should do. And if you look at other country statistics, very clearly the statistics indicate that 88% of major corporations in the USA have codes of ethics, and several organizations have introduced some ethics program or committee to deal with the corporate ethical problems. In other words, the organizations have voluntarily have done a set of things. But when we talk about ethical behavior, one can see the organizational responsible behavior towards the society. It can also mean that the individual level, what that individual is doing is correct or not correct. One can also judge as a misconduct or a misbehavior, but we are also talking about what is ethical behavior. Ethical behavior is something which is acceptable in the eyes of the beholder. So the best judge is the self, and one can always see the person could have been ethical, means he should have followed some right practices and right procedures. But we also see the behavior that conforms to generally accepted social norms. That means not violating, not moving away from the expected norms of the organization in which the person is working, as well as it is acceptable to all others in the society or in its context. Examples of unethical behavior could be many things. It is borrowing office supplies for personal use. One can see the surfing the net on company time. But in some context, the organization may respond, no, the surfing is a useful developmental process. So they may accept this, but in some other context, it is not acceptable. So it is a matter of degree, it's a matter of concern. The organization has to make it very explicit what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And similarly, a dilemma exists when you have a choice between two or more options. Now, the business dilemmas always exist when the decision maker have to choose between set of options. Certainly you know that this is going to affect the profitability. Recycling means you have to invest in the technology. That is, you have to use the water. So obviously you cannot use the potable water. Then you have to get some other. The lot of building activities, construction activities pose this kind of a problem, whether what kind of water they should use in the construction activities. So the concern is that how to be profitable and competitive on the one side, and why to invest in the technology and take care of the people around. And definitely the stakeholders. It is when you have to invest for the future and when you have to declare the dividends, when you have to give the cash out. So the organizations do have to resolve some of these basic issues, and then comes as a kind of a concern how much you have for the different stakeholders. The conflict explains the need to resolve need to resolve in an acceptable manner. So ethics is also viewed from a moral philosophy, and it involves the systematizing, defending and recommending concepts, the right and the wrong behavior. So what is right and what is wrong is a part of this business ethics, is the application of general ethical principles to business dilemmas. Many organizations feel it is good, particularly the multinational corporations, it is good to follow certain standards in their home country and not necessarily to follow the similar things in the other countries where they do the business. It could be something about the bribe, it could be about the easy methods which they adopt to evolve certain practices, or it could be about the labor standards. So there are many of these kinds of concerns or questions, is it ethical? So ethics involves a discipline that examines good or bad practices within the context of a moral duty. So the moral conduct is behavior that is right or wrong, and business ethics include practices and behaviors that are good or bad. So the salary you pay to an expatriate, and if you have a very competent and equally good manager, would you pay the salary at the Indian levels, or do you pay similarly to what you are paying to an expatriate manager? All these are kind of a concerns that would pose a dilemma, it demands a decision. And then you know how fair is the organization, how unfair is the organization, are they very short term driven. So sometimes you feel it is okay to pay the local salary and then expatriate to pay the salary of their country. So what is okay can get interpreted at different levels. So that is where the people talk about the two key branches of ethics. The descriptive ethics involves describing, characterizing and studying the morality of what it is, and then normative ethics involves supplying and justifying moral system what it should be. So many times people talk about that respect for the age, or it could be the kind of a practices of what is good for you, but imposing on the others and classifying, judging others. So people say, look, it may be your standard, but you cannot use the same standard to judge others, that is unethical. So the question is, sometimes we are talking about what it is and sometimes it is what it should be. Conventional approach to business ethics involves a comparison of a decision of practice to the prevailing social norms. So but then we are always getting into that kind of a ethical relativism. That means it is good when it suits you, you are going to interpret it as it's a good behavior, and when it does not suit, then you are putting it as unethical behavior. So it may look at sometimes as a kind of a where the seniors are sending confusing signals to the others. It is always desirable in that kind of a context to see how different sources of ethical norms comes into picture. It is the fellow workers, it is the family, it is the friends, it is the law of the land, it is the religious beliefs with what people come, it could be about the vegetarianism, or it could be the eating of certain things, and it could also be kind of a regions of the country, that is within the country they can't expect the same norm, and also the professional ethics, belonging to a certain profession like human resource profession. If you belong, you will always talk about the rights of the labor, also the way the organizational compliance should be towards meeting the societal legislations, and also the employer, and finally the society at large. So each of these could be the source of the definition of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is good and what is not good. So when we see this, we really have to move on to these three models of management ethics. One can briefly describe this as immoral management, a style devoid of ethical principles and active opposition to what is ethical, certainly not acceptable. And then you also talk about this kind of a moral management. It conforms to high standards of ethical behavior, And also one can talk about an amoral management, which could be put as intentional, does not consider ethical factors, or sometimes unintentional. You are very causal or careless about ethical considerations in business. So one need to look into how these things would operate in the actual context. So the three types of this management ethics could give us some idea about why the dilemmas are, why the shades of behaviors are in an organization, and how one can look into and how one can analyze these things. So when you see this, we can put all these organizational characteristics and what this immoral management would mean. So if you see the ethical norms about the management decisions, actions and behavior imply an active opposition to what is moral or what is what is ethical. So in an immoral thing, that organization does not follow some of the basic labor standards. They don't keep the records properly, and you can see the clear exploitation of the people. So that's where you see it is certainly immoral. It is they accept, and the motives are very selfish. It could be the child labor. So the management cares only about its company's gains. So they think that they are getting cheap labor, they are getting away with many things, and they can only feed twice a day and get all the hours of work. So it could be many of these things are very selfish. So the goals are profitability and organizational success at any price. So the organization does not have a concern about what others think, what others will do, and what is that others are capable of, but it is all the time it is concerned about its own set of things. So orientation towards law, it must overcome to accomplish its goals. So the legal standards are seen as a barrier that management wants to overcome. So that means you want to see what is that can be done to get away from the law of the land. And that is how you see the management goes into kind of any of the short-term actions. It accepts giving bribery as useful, and then does not see or try to rationalize that is how it is in this country, and then exploit opportunities for corporate gain and cut corners when it appears useful. The strategy is of that nature. So when you look at this, the management ethics, it is very clearly part of this immoral management. From immoral management, if you look into the moral management, what are we talking about? In the moral management concept, the ethical norms, if you see, management activity conforms to a standard of ethical or the right behavior. So that means it could be about the taxation, it's about the compliance of any law of the land. Ethical leadership is commonplace on the part of the management, and they want to succeed only in the confines of sound ethical concept, fairness, justice, the kind of a due processes are followed, the profitability within the confines of legal obedience and ethical standards. People also call it as value-based management. They respect the law of the land, they are open, they are transparent, they go with global standards, and they are free to they allow anybody to come and look at their accounts or any such things. So they very clearly, the obedience towards letter, and it is also called as the spirit of law. Law is the minimum ethical behavior. It prefers to operate well above what the law mandates. So that means they want to go, have a concern for society. It could be about the reservation. One would go all about to make sure that the organization have the required diversity. They also define what is an inclusive society and create a processes within the organization to make sure at all levels a fairness is practiced. So I think these are all part of that initiatives what one can think of when you are talking about the moral management. So the strategy is live by sound ethical standards and assume leadership position when ethical dilemmas arise. So the leaders are there to take charge and define what is good and what is right and help people to follow those aspects. we need to see an in-between and a moral kind of a management. They call it a moral management. So it's neither moral nor immoral, but decisions lie outside the sphere to which the more judgment apply. So management activities imply a lack of ethical perception and moral awareness. So they interpret sometimes selfish in the sense that impact on others is not considered, but goals other than profitability are really not considered. And if you see the law is the ethical guide, preferably the letter of the law, the central question is what we can do legally. So under the law, what best we can do, so what is that can be compromised. So if there is no inspection and if there is no regulation, or if there is a failure of regulation, the management would take for the shortcut approaches. So they respond to legal mandates if caught and required to do so. So depending upon the enforcement machinery, the machinery to impose the law, they will work. If the law is loose, or in the sense that if the supervision is not there, then the organization gets into its own set of standards where they think, yes, it is okay to do kind of a thing. But normally the businesses have got a negative image when we talk about ethics. Over the time, the negative image of business is, I think, you are going to involve in unfair practices. And the most business people do not wake up wanting to harm their stakeholders, but competitive pressures, individual greed, and differing cultural contexts generate ethical issues for organizational managers. And such things do create confusion at different levels. As we have discussed, we need to see how can we correct this. It is difficult to find a positive portrayal of business also in movies and books and TV shows. More generally, less than 2% of the Americans rated the US companies as excellent corporate citizens. So this study shows that no doubt they have put many of the ethical guidelines and concerns in the organization, but common perception is business means it is not necessarily they follow everything. And it is almost every organization, some people have inclination to behave unethically. So necessitating systems to ensure that such a behavior is either stopped or detected after unethical behavior occurs, and then it is remedied. That means there are many mechanisms to exist under law to take care of this. As we see, the question comes is why should the business and the ethics to be perceived as conflicting, and what is that one should do? So there are a number of reasons why business should act ethically. Very clearly to meet stakeholder expectations and protect the business's reputation. So it's one of the clear thing is that your investors, your customers, your suppliers must feel that you are fair and then you are taking care of their interests. So that is first kind of a thing. To prevent causing harm to the general public. So the general public need to be aware of, you may be using chemicals, you may be using technologies which are harmful in the long run, you may be consuming energy which is in the short supply. So many of these things. And also to build trust with key stakeholder groups. The trust is extremely important. Businesses are going to experience both ups and downs. And so the organizations need to be more transparent, and very clearly the stakeholders need to see what organizations are doing are useful in the short as well as in the long term perspective. And definitely to protect themselves from abuse from unethical employees as well as the competitors. So the businesses, if you see, they have to protect their own employees, and they have to create an environment in which workers can act in ways consistent with their values. So it is in the US we are seeing corporate sentencing guidelines also provide an incentive to set up corporate ethics programs. We don't have similar approaches in India. it is extremely important to see how to create good ethical practices within the organization. We do have set of things laid out as a part of the Standing Orders Act, but we are talking about today the beyond the law, beyond the fair practices. The organizations need to see what is to be done. We also look at in terms of what could be there as a kind of an issues. Now, managerial mischiefs are called as it's illegal, unethical or questionable practices of individual managers or organizations, as well as causes of such behaviors and remedies to eradicate them. So, one of the key things to understand is managers are in the position, and when they are in the position, they have the powers. They have the powers to influence career, they have powers to influence, to allocate resources. So, you need to see what is that they would do. And we are talking about this particularly the public sector managers, government sector managers, that they need to use their positions to support and meet the organizational objectives rather than getting into the short-term actions. The moral measures of management includes the numerous ethical problems that managers must deal with on a daily basis, such potential conflicts of interest, wrongful use of resources, mismanagement of contracts and agreements, etc. So, that means when they are in the position, so definitely there are strong do's and don'ts, and then it could be as simple as when your relative is appearing for the examination or your relative is appearing as a candidate, then normally it is demanded that you are not a part of the decision making process. Let us also quickly look at these myths about the business ethics, that our employees are ethical, so we do not need attention to business ethics. I think the employees' individual actions are different and the actions at the organizational levels are different. So, it is important to compare both. The business ethics is more a matter of religion than management. It is not true. The ethics is not philosophy, ethics is not management, ethics is not a kind of a thing, it is philosophy. So, what we are talking about, it is the ethics are ethics, it is nothing to do with the philosophy or the religion, or who by basically if they are religious does not mean that they have ethical practices in the organization. It is also to be seen in business ethics must be taught or a discipline best done by the philosophers or academics or theologians. I think again it is not true. Every manager need to follow the fairness principles at all levels. I think the leadership should be led by these ethical practices. The business ethics is superfluous. It only asserts the obvious. So, that means do good kind of a thing. No, I think it is the protection of rights, protection of privileges, doing more and being nice. These are not just desirable things. I think these are the matter of rights, it is a matter of concerns. When organizations is able to do, they are able to assert themselves and look for or demand for similar practices from the employees or other stakeholders. The business ethics is a matter of the good guys preaching to the bad guys. It is not true. Again, it is another myth. It is the every level of the organization need to follow in the interest of protecting the individual actions as well as the organizational success in the long run. Similarly, the business ethics is the new police person on the block. I think the best thing is it is integrated at the individual level. It is much more internal than it is external. So, it is important to build some good practices and good stories at the childhood level, at the early stage of induction, and then continue to build that kind of a culture and climate at all levels. Another myth is about the ethics cannot be managed. It is not true. The ethics need to be managed. Guidelines must be put. People must have an awareness. People must accept what is correct and what is right. and a commitment need to be built around the good role models, good practices across the organization. And when people violate ethical norms, they get into the unfair practices that also must be punished in the way others can notice and follow what is correct. Unnoticed, unethical behaviors can only lead to a deterioration in following of the good practices. The other myth is business ethics and social responsibility are the same thing. I think we are going to elaborate on this, but the social responsibility is what the organization is doing to express its concerns more proactive way. When we are talking about ethics, we are definitely talking about the rights, we are talking about the correct practices and fair practices. And so one cannot say that we don't have any problems with law and so that we are ethical. So there are many guidelines, many standards are not even considered as a part of the law. So the societal norms, what is acceptable and what is good, most of the time is normative and it is not stated. So the organizations need to work through, organizations need to consider these things in a systematic fashion and see it is not just law, but it is much more than that. And managing ethics in the workplace has little practical relevance. I think it is not true. Ethics are to be followed on a daily basis, and then the concern needs to maintain at all levels. You also see some of the benefits what the organization can have through following the right practices, and the business ethics substantially improve the society. So that means when people are fair, when people are respecting the suppliers, respecting their own stakeholders, you will also see the general condition in the society will improve. Ethics programs help maintain a moral course, particularly in turbulent times. When organizations have to undergo a dip in their performance, that's the time where ethical organizations are able to sustain such things through their good suppliers, or maybe committed customers, or through the committed labor. But when you are not ethical, I think then the turbulent times, the others may ditch you or others may not cooperate with you to the extent they should be. Ethics programs also cultivate strong teamwork and productivity. It builds long-term commitment of the employees, and people see a fairness and right practices at all levels. They try and give their emotional and spiritual best if the organization is ethical. Ethics programs also support employee growth and meaning. It helps people to see the game in the long run, that when the organization is fair, their own practices, their own actions also will be much more holistic, and individuals do respond to such expectations of the organization. We also see ethics programs is like an insurance policy, that they help ensure that policies are legal, that you are following the right employee practices or employment practices, and then you are also taking care of their interests, you are taking care of your customers, you are meeting all the requirements of the society. So the ethics programs ensures that you will have a sound sleep. So the ethics program help avoid criminal acts of omission and can also get into any of the penalties likely to be imposed by the other enforcement agencies. And also it creates a public image in the long run. People would like to see you as a preferred employer, and that itself will be able to do a lot of good in attracting great talent to the organization. Ethics program also help manage values associated with quality management, strategic planning and diversity management. As I mentioned earlier, that when you are ethical, you try and question what you are doing to the customer, what you are doing to your employees, and then put programs which will build long-term sustenance. Ethics program build overall the quality of work life, and The last and the most is that ethics in the workplace is always focusing on the what's the right thing to do. Is it good, nice, or what is correct? So all these things will clarify, and the managers are able to work through their dilemmas. Always, if you see the managing ethical behavior, it begins with the top management, which establishes the organizational culture and defines what will not be an acceptable behavior, what will be an acceptable behavior and what is not an acceptable behavior, and includes training on how to handle different ethical dilemmas. It also recognizes the managing ethics, as a kind of a process. That means it is systematic. The bottom line of an ethics program is accomplishing preferred behaviors in the workplace. So people are shown when they are likely to compromise certain things. The best way to handle ethical dilemmas is to avoid their occurrence in the first place. So that means you create opportunities, you create systems, you create practices so that people are able to do good things than follow the wrong, unethical practices. So make ethics decision in groups and don't allow, so that collective decisions are likely to be much more ethical. That's the idea. And make decisions public as appropriate so that others can reflect as well, so that the errors are minimized. And integrate ethics management as a part of the other management practices. As we are talking about different functional areas of management, I think we must make sure that what is wrong, what is correct, what is best must be discussed and taught, and new practices must be arrived at based on ethical considerations at all levels. So it has to become a part of the management development and management programs. So one of the important considerations is how can we develop some of these practices. We need to value forgiveness. So people must be told, must be repeatedly told, must be given all opportunity to practice. Should also note that trying to operate ethically and making a few mistakes is better than not trying at all. So this must be built step by step, and the organizational members need to understand. The organization's chief executive must also fully support this program. He cannot say there is one standard for me, another standard for the others. I think then you will see the kind of gaps coming in terms of its implementation. So an ethics committee to be created at the highest level so that they can take charge and they can take care of the responsibilities and come up with the gaps in ethics management and its implementation. Also establishing this committee alone won't be sufficient. It may be a person, an individual can also be made more responsible towards meeting those things. And it may be an external person as well, could be appointed. An ombudsperson could also contribute to see whether policies and procedures, what is followed in the organization is institutionalized, and then it is good in terms of the moral values in the workplace. So it is ultimately what we are trying to see is that one person must ultimately be responsible for managing the ethics management program, but a culture need to be built around that. But why is not a business fad? If you see, ethics have a considerable influence if you want to efficient, smooth operating economy, that is at the societal level, and the government laws and lawyers cannot resolve several key things, key problems of business, and many a times you can get away from the hands of the law, but ethics will help to do some good practices. And ethical activity is valuable in itself because it enhances the quality of our work lives and also the work what we do day in and day out. And everything that is legal, we should see it is not ethical. That's what I am trying to say it in repeated ways. Business ethics encompasses a broader range of issues and concerns that than what the law can enforce. So it is often possible for businesses to preempt legislation, and in doing so, particularly in our country where the law takes its own sweet time to settle issues. So one can drag the issues, but one should also see what is good, what is ethical from the employee point of view or the stakeholder point of view or from the management point of view too. And so the issues need to be settled in the most ethical manner, which means whatever you see is being done to you, is it the same thing can be done to the other person? How do you see it as fair or unfair? So the most corporate ethics codes go beyond mere compliance with the law, and they take it in a broad range of social responsibilities to various stakeholders. As we see from the various business scandals, the cost associated with illegal and or unethical activities are in the untold billions, sometimes not to mention this non-monetary cost. We have seen that organizations are not able to enter the same country again because they are perceived as unethical. There are key cultural differences in ethical decision making, and that separate the ethical attitudes of the different people. So always one should also be seeing what are some of the cultural differences and what is an ethically responsible company and what is ethics and profit. So how much profit the organization should be making and who is contributing for this. So there are views clearly expressed, particularly the Gandhian view has been seen as that you need to be a trustee, and where he advocated this concept of trusteeship. And then people are also talking about when you have a monopolistic kind of a situation, is it right or it is good on your part to charge whatever you want, or look at another situation of a famine or where people are in distress. So can you go and sell at whatever the price? It may be at water or maybe some consumer durables, or it is the daily consumption articles. Can you go and sell it at any price because it is in short supply and only you have that kind of a commodity? So many of these things are to be discussed and debated so that you establish the proper culture. The codes and culture go together. And another important part is about the gender and the fairness and giving opportunities to women in the corporation. And definitely the systemic issues of economics and the environment is always our consideration. So we look at these ethic tools, or we are also talking about the codes of ethics. A code of ethics specifies that ethical rules of operation. So many ethicists would note that it is the developing and continuing dialogue around the codes, values, that is most important. So that means you need to develop evangelists in the organization. Codes of ethics and codes of conduct may be the same in some organizations, depending on the organizational culture and operations. And definitely, ultimately what you have to see is the specificity of the codes, whether it is explicit, whether it is written out, whether it is communicated to all people, and whether people participate in such a way so that very clearly they know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So that is where a written statement of the values and ethical standards that guide the firm's actions are most important. So it is when we have to develop a code of ethics, we need to see the organization as a whole, and it includes several large programs and departments. So we have to see what is the corporate code of ethics, and then sometimes you also have to develop a code of guide to each of the programs or the departments. So depending on the kind of functions they are performing, they must be told. For example, human resource departments must be told to deal with all the applicants in a fair manner. Just because they are applying to the organization and you are not likely going to select them does not mean that you are useless or unfit. So the organizations need to respond to them in a fair and in a nice manner. So that is the lowest level what one can expect from the organization. It cannot be written or prescribed by any law, and that is how we are talking about ethical behavior is going beyond the law. And the code should not be developed out of the human resource or the legal departments alone, as it is done by somebody writes the code of ethics borrowed or from some other context. It is extremely important that large number of people participate, understand, and then follow this in and day out. The codes are insufficient. It is only intended to ensure that some policies are legal. As I mentioned earlier, that is, all staff must see the ethics. Ethics programs are driven by the top management. What we talk about always, this Yatha Raja and Tatha Praja. So that means what the leaders follow, the others also would be watching, and then they are perceived as role models. So it is extremely important to review any values that need to adhere to the relevant laws and regulations. Particularly one must see the tax and the tax compliance. So it is not that you will avoid certain things, but you must see how much you have to do so that you are taking care of, you are responsible to the societal expectations. So review which values produce the top 3 or 4 traits of highly ethical and successful product or service in your area. Make sure that people follow to the quality standards. Identify values needed to address current issues in the workplace. So one must see, why do people don't follow? Why do people compromise? What are the issues? Do they have a clear perception of the right and the wrong? So one need to understand the education requirement and what one need to do. And similarly, we need to see how can we make sure that some of these values are appreciated. How can we correct some of these things if people are following as a part of the strategic planning. So reorganization or reporting relationship could be understood, and new technologies can be deployed. We should also see what the stakeholders want. Sometimes the customers want an update on their flow of work as quickly as possible. So one should see what could be the kind of a practices which can be put in the organization, so that you are not misleading your customer, but giving the correct and true information. So it is important to see what are the top 5-10 areas of action which is most important to the organization or high priority for the organization, and one can allow these things to be happening in the organization. So we are talking about it could include many things: honesty, integrity, promise keeping, loyalty kind of a thing, which is all related to the trustworthiness. Respect, which is in terms of the autonomy, privacy, dignity, the courtesy, tolerance, acceptance. So we do have tolerance for the kind of a minority could be, or the kind of autonomy provided to different groups, and people are seen that they are important members of the organization. And responsibility in terms of giving accountability, and also the pursuit of excellence, where people see, yes, they need to pursue the global standards. It also could be further thing is caring, the compassion. So that means you are taking care of, for example, there are many organizations provide for entry and exit for physically challenged people. That's a response in terms of the caring. Compassion, consideration, giving, sharing, kindness and loving. So many of these things are day-to-day part of the quality of work life. Justice and fairness, procedural fairness. Particularly we use this domestic inquiry. Very clearly you provide all the opportunities for the employee to defend himself or herself. Impartiality, consistency, that you are applying the rules across the organization in similar fashion, and also the equity, that all people are treated as same, and also the equality, and also follow all the due processes. So that means people are treated comparatively equal, and then they see, yes, the organization does not differentiate based on gender or any other considerations. And also we are talking about this corporate citizenship or the corporate virtue. So it is basically law abiding and doing community service and also the protection of environment. So as we are trying to see, there are set of behaviors to be put. So we must put what is we compose your code of ethics. So that means attempt to associate with each value and then give some examples of behaviors which reflect each value. So that means people have to give, say about when you say respect, now then you will demand that when all people meet or when people sit, that means you create, yes, unless the senior most person sits or the senior most person, when they are talking about, the others don't interrupt or others would listen or others would sit. So create such kind of an examples of what is correct and what is to be done. Or you may say, okay, your behavior is not considered as unethical, but if you do this following things. So include wording that indicates all employees are expected to conform to the values stated to the code of ethics. So it could be the acceptance or the obedience of the orders of the superior. It could be about how to use the company resources and the material, and sometimes it is also obtain a review from key members of the organization. So an example is somebody sells the butter in the organization. Now is it correct? Now then somebody say no, not during the working hours. During lunchtime, one may say yes, it may be desirable. Then no, not in the company premises. No, but then somebody says no, any of such things are not acceptable, whether within the company or outside the company, during lunch hour or after the work hours. So the question is, people must be told very clearly, yes, what is clearly not acceptable. Otherwise, one may rationalize of this may be all right kind of a thing. Announce and distribute the new code of ethics, unless you are waiting to announce it along with any new code of conduct and associated policies. The best is that you give some ideas to the people what to accept and what to do and what not to do. It could be about the acceptance of the gift, or it could be about the treating of the employees or meeting the governmental expectations. It is extremely important to educate people. It is extremely important to create that required awareness. It is extremely important to create the required role models. In summary, we have seen the following things. We will be talking about the business ethics and the philosophy. We have talked about the ethics in business, the kind of myths people associate about the business ethics, and the benefits of managing ethics, and some of the key roles and responsibilities in ethics management, and how to evolve some guidelines for managing ethics in the workplace, and ethics and law, and also some of the tools of implementing ethics program. And in the next session, we will try and focus on the social responsibility of the business and how business should respond to the concerns of society at large and also the immediate community.